lot of others out there, and I'm trying to memorialize them now in a book that I'm working on. It's the title, working title is The Right Stuff but the Wrong Direction. And for those of us in the undersea business, I think you understand what I mean. That we were under the umbrella of the space program, and 2 years after we started and brought the Trieste to the U.S. Navy bought it and brought it to San Diego, and we were getting lots of attention about the future in the deep ocean, exploring the deep ocean. Here comes the space program, and the president, and Kennedy declared that we were going to go to the moon. And for the rest of our program, we were always junior varsity. That wasn't anybody's fault. That's just, the luck of the draw. Because after all, John Kennedy was famously known for saying that whenever there's smoke, there's usually a smoke machine. And NASA always had a pretty damn good smoke machine. And we were just 16 people. I mean, we had a hard time just picking up donuts and a copy of the newspaper in the morning when we came into work. So we weren't contributing much to news. And of course, what we do, and I think Jim will agree with this, when we dive, there's just a cloud of bubbles. And then, 1 minute's there, the next minute's gone. And the space thing, that's sonne lumiere, He's got these nice suits and flags on them, and I mean, it's all functional. I don't mean to be pejorative about it. We don't have that. I mean, we're on top of this thing, especially the Trieste, and it was very wet. We were getting a saltwater enema about every other swell. And we knew we had to get in the damn thing and then spend hours down there soaking wet. And for those of you of a certain age, if you look at the pictures that were taken that time, I was always in uniform. Bill Broad, the New York Times Pulitzer Prize science writer in the New York Times, said the dapper uniform Don Walsh. It wasn't that. The Trieste was bought and paid for by you all, American taxpayers, and operated by the U.S. Navy. And every time there's a camera pointed at that thing, you saw naval officers or naval personnel fully dressed. It wasn't the ideal kit to wear in that kind of environment. We should have had a suit of lights like you've seen, and a little red hat and all that stuff with flags on it. But that wasn't what we were at. We were trying to show that America, we had purchased this thing, we paid for it, we paid for all of the upgrades to it, and we planned and executed this operation, the deepest dive in the world. And I can remember, if you just give me a moment,
Take several.
Well, no, you've already given me a few. The research and development side of the Navy, the research guys, that's where all the fun is. It's building the Navy of tomorrow. They had bought this thing from the Picards in January of 68, and 58, thank you. And there's a historian here, I can see. No, that's fine. In 1958. And Auguste Piccard and Jacques Piccard intimated, theoretically, the theory of the thing is you could go to any depth. Now, the one you just bought can only go to 20,000 feet. If we got a new cabin and we increase the size of the balloon, we can do the ultimate dive. Obviously, they have research like that, so they gave them, I think it was an extra $500,000 to get a new cabin built in Europe. Well, now, this went on, and I came into the program about a year later, and no one had told the operating side of the Navy, the people who run the Navy, that the R&D community had done this thing and had spent a lot of perfectly good money to make sure this machine could go to the deepest place in the ocean. So after I arrived, and this was my first command of the Navy, I was told that maybe it's time to tell the people in the Navy Department, the Pentagon, what we're about. So I typed out an operation order in my office and vetted it up through the command of my Navy lab in San Diego. And then I took it back to Washington. The Office of Naval Research, the R&D guy said, well, very interesting, Lieutenant Walsh, but go see Captain so-and-so. Captain so-and-so said, go see Rear Admiral so-and-so. Next thing I know, I'm across the Potomac and in the Pentagon, in the Navy Department, same thing. And after about 3 days, I couldn't get a decision. So, well, here it is. Well, that's very interesting, but it's above my pay grade, so kept going up. I'm standing in the hallway outside Admiral Arnie Burke's office. He was the Chief of Naval Operations and a crusty old seagoing admiral. And he was pretty much singed by the fact that the Navy had promised that the first Earth orbiting satellite would be done by the United States Navy. Well, and so all the press comes down to then Cape Kennedy, Cape Canaveral, and they watch these things go up and be destructed just above the pad, or head for St. Louis, or dive into the Atlantic Ocean, hardly going into space. He wasn't going to have any more of that. And so when I show up, a very young lieutenant, with this thing, well, merely, Admiral, just put it in the water and dive to the deepest place in the ocean. He said, Walsh, I want to tell you something. Yes, Admiral. If you make it, we'll talk about it. If you don't make it, we're not going to talk about it. So you're embargoed. Tell no one. So we went out to Guam with this thing. And it's just that Life magazine, National Geographic, and the London Daily Mail had heard about it. And they were sort of admitted because they said they'd rat on us if we didn't let them come. So they were on Guam with us. But that was the thing. And when I talked to Admiral Burke, he said, well, how about Lieutenant Shoemaker? Larry Shoemaker was my deputy, my assistant. And we were actually Annapolis classmates, but I was a little senior to him, so I was the boss. And he said, well, I said, Admiral, he's going to run the topside operations, and I'll be in the sub, of course. He said, well, I've got a message for Shoemaker. And I said, well, I'll certainly pass it on to him, Admiral. You know, this guy's 4-star Admiral. He said, you tell Shoemaker, if you Walsh don't come up, I'm going to have his balls. Now, that's kind of crude talk for a 4-star admiral. 5 years later, we had a celebratory dinner at the Washington Navy Yard, and I sat next to him, and I said, Admiral Burke, you remember this? He said, I wouldn't ever talk like that. And I said, Admiral Burke, when a lieutenant is told that 4-star admiral in charge of our entire Navy, something like that, that lieutenant tends to remember. So he grinned and he said, yeah, you're probably right. So that's some of the background of how we got it done. But I'm standing here representing all those people. Most of them are dead now. And I'm writing this book on behalf of their grandfather and maybe husband for the widows and their grandchildren, to tell them about what great things that they did. And I want to do it for them. And I've been remiss in taking so many years to do it, but it's now a work in progress. And I run out of things to say. I thought you'd just like to have a little background behind what we've done. It was just 16 of us, 16 people, and they left us alone. They didn't know what we were doing. We are operating in a vacuum, but a well-funded vacuum. So people couldn't even pronounce bathyscaphe. So we, this little team of ours, 24/7, we worked on Guam for 7 months. And we got the job done. Now, Jim can understand this because he worked on Guam for quite a while and what it takes to mobilize all this stuff and get it put together. And we were successful, and so was Jim. And so with that, I'll conclude my remarks by thanking you all for coming here, thanking you and your mom, I know who you are, thanking the Debbie and her daughter and Charlie, wherever he is, the organizers of this thing. It's been a wonderful event, and we've all enjoyed being here. Thank you so much.